Hello, my name is Elenita Shimalaski, and I'm with Brodart. I am the Director of Marketing and Co-op Advertising, and I'm so excited to be sharing Earth Day celebration contest with you. We had a lot of entrants for the contest, and the High Grove Public Library in Riverside, California won. And for winning our Earth Day celebration, we say congratulations. We're going to be talking about the Save the series. These are books that focus on endangered species. So far, there are 11 books covering 11 different animals like frogs, whale sharks, polar bears, and many, many more. The books are published by Philomel, written by 3 different authors, and all have an introduction by Chelsea Clinton. These books are written for young readers that read chapter books. Each book provides interesting and fun facts about a certain animal, like elephants. Do you know that elephants eat 16 hours a day in order to maintain their size and weight? A whale shark has a very thin esophagus, and what that does, it causes it to not be able to eat large foods, so they eat krill. So these are some of the fun facts, but the books also include tips on how to save the species and help the environment. Today, authors Chelsea Clinton, Christine Taylor Butler, Sarah Thompson, with publisher Jill Santopolo, will be talking about these books. Jill, over to you.
Nonfiction books and articles for children. She has served as past literary awards judge for PEN America and the Society of Midland Authors. And Sarah L. Thompson has published more than 30 books, including prose and poetry, fiction and nonfiction, picture books and novels, including books about elephants, sharks, tigers, pliosaurs, saber-toothed cats, and other fascinating creatures. She worked as an editor at HarperCollins and Simon & Schuster before becoming a full-time writer. So that's who we've got with us today. And I'm so excited to talk about this series because one of the things that I really love about it is all of the information, plus the empowering message and the photographs inside. So I want to talk about all of those things. And I want to start by asking you, Chelsea, why did you want to create this series? What does this series mean to you, especially in celebration of Earth Month?
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for the question. And it's so wonderful to be in conversation with everyone here today. And, Jill, I'm always so happy and grateful to be able to talk about endangered species and certainly to be able to highlight the wonderful species who are incredible authors, Christine and Sarah, have lent their time and their talents to helping kind of bring to life for young readers. And so, for me, it was so important that the chapter books kind of be an outgrowth of the picture book, Don't Let Them Disappear, because I wish I'd had these books when I was still a relatively young reader. I have always wanted to know more about our world, our Earth, not just during the month of April, but every month of the year, and to know more about of the species that are so kind of prescient and help kind of give so much wonder and life to our planet. And I know so many kids feel the same way, because when I was on the book tour for Don't Let Them Disappear, I kept hearing from kids like, oh my gosh, we want to know more. Where can we go to learn more about kind of the different species in this book and beyond? And so I'm so thankful that kind of that curiosity and interest from children, and admittedly kind of the nostalgia of what I wish I had known as a kid. And, Jill, with your wonderful partnership, has enabled us to bring this series into the world.
So awesome. And I know that, so there's, your childhood experiences and all of that, which feed into this, which I may ask you a little bit more about later. But Christine and Sarah, what was the most exciting thing for you about writing these books? And are there any particularly fun things you learned about your animals that you want to share? Should we start with Christine?
Oh, there was just so much. It's just overwhelming because you think you know about the animals and you see them in the zoo, and then you start figuring out how diverse they are and how much emotional intelligence they demonstrate. So I think we think of animals as creatures that operate on instinct, but particularly when I got to polar bears, and they have to hunt, and when they have babies, they haven't eaten for months because they're in the den while they're giving birth, or the babies are growing. So they come out and they're hungry and they're starving. But when the babies come out, they're playing, and it's scaring the prey away, and they're making all these vibrations. And so the fact that tigers and polar bears discipline their kids is just fascinating, and it put things in perspective when I'm disciplining my kids, who are now young ladies.
Wait, that's nice. That's amazing. So how do tigers and polar bears discipline their children?
Well, they growl at them, they scold them, they swat them, you know, and so you begin to realize that we're all animals. When I'm out and talking to kids in schools, I go, they're mammals just like us. And so
Right.
their moms are just like me. and I could put that in context, but it makes them think in a different way.
That's so cool. What about you, Sarah? What excited you about this series, or any of your animals in particular?
I just have so much fun with these animals, and just learning more and more about them. And I have to say, I thought my favorite were going to be the lions, because it's so interesting that they live in a social group and they're the only cat that functions as a group instead of living solitary. But it turned out that the frogs were my favorite. And I did not know I would be so fascinated with frogs, but there are so many different kinds, and they have all of these fascinating and fabulous adaptations. And I bored my friends and family silly by telling them about the newest cool frog thing I'd found out, and they were all super tired of hearing me talk about the Suriname sea toad, which hatches its eggs on the mom's back. The mom lays the eggs, the dad kicks them onto the mom's back, they sink into her skin a little bit because she's very soft and squishy, and then a layer of skin grows over each egg, and that's where the eggs are, underneath her skin on her back, and that's where they hatch into tadpoles, and that's where the tadpoles develop into frogs, and they don't break through the little skin and swim away until they're fully formed teeny little frogs.
That is fascinating.
That was my favorite.
I remember reading that and thinking that is one of those incredible things in nature that I'm so glad that I now know after reading your book. So one of the other things, in addition to the amazing facts like frog babies growing on their mother's back, that I love about these books is the empowerment, what you can do section, because, I firmly believe, and I think this series is firmly, of the belief too, that no matter how young or old someone is, they can always do something that makes a difference. So Chelsea, could you talk a little bit more about that section and why it was so important to you to have that section in these books?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jill. So, in the picture book, Don't Let Them Disappear, we have kind of a what you can do at the end of that book, because I completely echo what you've shared, not surprisingly, that you're never too young or too old to start to make a difference. And I do think kids, particularly those who are drawn, on such a kind of instinctual level to these or other animals, very much often also have it. And I want to help take care of them. I want to help protect them, or I want to help, kind of protect the environments in which they live. But if I'm a kid who lives in, New York City or Detroit or Riverside, like, what can I do for a frog, on the other side of the planet, or a polar bear, that is thousands of miles away? And so it was really important to me that, we not leave kids feeling kind of helpless, but instead empower kids with, there are things that you can do to help fight climate change. And that is good for our polar bears, or to help kind of prevent, trash winding up in our lakes and our rivers, our streams, that's good for our frogs. And so it was
Mhm.
really important to me that all of the chapter books kind of have those, and you can do something. In fact, you can do many
Mhm.
somethings, or sometimes you can do something like with your parents to really help ensure that these animals that clearly you value because you've just read a whole book about them are here for your hopefully very long life and kind of the long lives of generations to come.
I think that's so important. And I know from previous conversations that we've had and some things that you've talked about, that you did things when you were a kid to try and help save particular animals. And I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about the things that you had done.
Oh goodness, yes. I tried to do lots of things when I was little. I tried to kind of raise awareness about kind of the crisis facing animals that I cared a lot about. So, in the 1980s, another time when elephants, as one example, were under real threat, I would talk to anyone, excuse me, who I knew who was interested in music, that, they should never buy a piano with ivory keys. They should, use a piano with synthetic keys. They should never kind of buy an instrument that had ivory in it. That, there was no humane way to remove ivory, from an elephant tusk. And so that was sort of one type of campaign. I also maniacally kind of cut up the plastic rings around soda cans, and then would like sometimes put them on very like brightly colored construction paper and hand them out to people in my neighborhood or at church or at school to encourage them to do the same, because I knew that along the Gulf Coast, so kind of like the southern coast of of much of the South in the United States. So not Arkansas, we're not a coastal state, but along the coast in Louisiana or Alabama, Mississippi, I knew that there were kind of sea life who were kind of choking on these plastic rings. I knew that also closer to home in our, rivers, lakes, streams, ponds in Arkansas, we had, ducks and other, types of birds, but also fish or frogs or salamanders who were similarly, choking on or kind of being choked by the plastic soda rings. And so, I tried to kind of raise awareness about the crisis facing animals that I really cared about, and also tried to help protect animals, and even kind of maybe the very small but still very real ways I could as a kid in Arkansas many years ago.
I love that. I particularly love the cutting up of the plastic rings, and I totally did that too. Um, so Christine and Sarah, in writing up the lists of tips for what kids could do to make a difference in these chapter books, were there particular things that either you or children had done, or tips that you feel like you do now, even as grown-ups? Maybe Sarah, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. I always liked the thinking of the tips at the end and thinking of things we can do, because just like Chelsea said, we don't want to read these books about the risks that these animals are in and end up feeling helpless and hopeless. We because there isn't any reason to be hopeless, we can definitely take action. And I love putting a combination of things in, these small personal things that you can do, like, recycle that plastic bottle, or gee, let's not even recycle it. What if you didn't use it in the first place? That's even better. How about having a reusable one? And these small actions that when we look at our lives, we can all make small choices every day that add up to a lot. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you can make those choices. And then also including ways that kids and their families can support organizations that are doing great conservation work, because we may not be able to individually go and save a lion, but we can certainly all find ways to support the organizations that are doing great work on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So those, I really liked having a balance of those two things in each book.
Yeah. And I think the small steps you were talking about are just so important when it comes to so many people living on Earth making choices every day. And it adds up when, you make those tiny choices and other people make those tiny choices, and all of a sudden there's a big impact. What about you, Christine?
Well, I had a selfish reason for really loving that chapter. Um, I worked as an engineer for a very long time in corporate America, but in the evening, I was chairing the local educational council for MIT, and we would see these 12th graders come in and interview to get into college, and they have straight A's and they have perfect test scores. But I don't ask traditional questions, and neither did my team, some of whom were like CEOs of corporations. And what we were looking for is back what I talked about with animals is emotional intelligence. So the kids would have their resumes and, oh, I did this and I was a Siemens finalist. And I would sit there and I would go, I know what you did. I don't know why you did it. And
Mhm.
what is happening is I was a free range kid growing up, and I grew up in an activist family. So we were polite troublemakers from a very early age. And if you know the movie 9 to 5, it is actually based on stories told by women who worked in an organization, 9 to 5, one of which was my mom. And my dad was a local organizer. So my mom got the Wonder Woman Award the same year as Cicely Tyson.
Wow.
And so we have been quietly doing all this stuff. And one of them was when I was growing up, girls and women couldn't wear pants to school. I'm an elementary school student, so we're right in the sweet spot. So not knowing how the system worked, my sisters and I, with my mom's encouragement, had a petition drive across the city of Cleveland and had kids going out and getting, their neighbors to sign the paper. So fast forward to this century, and we don't have free range kids. And we want to help kids by telling them this is how you should do a thing. And what I'm looking for are the kids who go, you know what? I had this idea. So I got a bunch of people together and I did it. Because those are the ones that by the time they were getting to me at 12th grade, I was flagging them for MIT and saying they're reading independently and they went out and did this thing and it may not have worked, but they were excited about it. So what I looked for with these books is it's not just learning a set of facts. It's this is what we as humans have done to these animals. And if we're losing the animals, how long before we lose us? Make that
Mhm.
connection. So
Yeah.
something as simple as I thought, oh, palm oil is supposed to help us reduce fossil fuels, till you find out in order to make palm oil, you are clearing out the rainforests, which is one scientist in my book I quoted said, a rainforest is Earth's air conditioner. So we are clearing out the very things that are protecting us to put these two things, because nobody's making the connection. So what I figured out is, I said, writing is my act of civil disobedience, which is why I quit my engineering job 20 years ago to write for kids, is because we can get information into kids at an earlier age, and then that starts to populate how they make decisions as they're moving to the 12th grade. So the book series was interesting and also a challenge, because we're saying, okay, what can you do? Okay, think about the palm oil and are there alternatives, but also think about recycling and all the microplastics. But here's a thing you can do, which is, can you get a reusable container? So you're not putting
Right.
plastics in the system at all. Can you switch to glass? And then the third thing is, do not wait until you're a 12th grader trying to impress a college interviewer. As an elementary kid, draw a picture and then send it to your members of Congress and say, you know what, this is my planet too. I want you to fix this. Because I think enough kids doing that might get into the news and might get Congress acting in a way where they're not acting now, but it's like canaries in the coal mine. We're losing animals. After a while, we're going to be losing us.
Wow. I feel like that's like the Earth Day slogan right there, Christine. um, and you were just talking about the different things that people were doing kind of on their own, and these books feature those people who have made a difference in and around the world, doing tons of different things.
Yeah.
Either working with with scientists or organizations, or different ways to protect animals and protect the environment. So I guess for all three of you, are there people who've made a difference in the world of conservation and animal activism that you really feel are a real inspiration to you? Guess we can maybe do Chelsea and then Christine and then Sarah.
Yeah, I think Jill, and actually reflecting on what Christine was just sharing about kind of why people do certain things, kind of what is the motivation, kind of behind kind of why a student may choose a certain class in school or to pursue an interest outside of school, or why someone may study something in college or graduate school, and then kind of why they're kind of focusing their time, talents, energy, hopes kind of in any one arena. I think what I find so compelling across the series, for the scientists and researchers that the authors choose to bring in is sometimes, there's very much a declarative, like, here's what we know. And sometimes it's, well, here's what we're still trying to find out, like, and the sense of how it's the mystery and the kind of detective side of science that brings so many people into understanding, why the whale sharks have this kind of migration pattern, or kind of why certain, kind of tribes of lions stay together and why not, why tigers, who are generally solitary animals, sometimes do travel, in pairs, kind of why kind of the matriarchs of elephant herds sometimes don't go back kind of to where kind of their kind of family may have been, for years, decades, or even generations, and kind of intuitively know, that's no longer, as safe as it once was, whether in terms of the risk of poachers or kind of a lack of water or food. And so I think that for me, it's not in any individual story that is important to me, kind of the science and researchers. It's really the kind of the scope of the stories, that are shared kind of by our amazing authors, including, Christine and Sarah, of what we have learned about kind of these animals, what intense kind of hopefully respectful and non-intrusive study has taught us about how polar bears parent, or kind of all sorts of things, that we've learned, and also how much we still don't know, and kind of what scientists are particularly focused on, partly because of their own curiosity and kind of their own kind of detective instincts, and also because of kind of what they and others think we need to know to better be able to protect these animals from poaching or illegal hunting, from habitat loss, from the ravages of climate change. And I think that balance is a really important one. Like, oh my gosh, science has illuminated so much for us, of what we know, and also illuminated so many questions that we now need to go about pursuing. And I think the authors do a really great job of that.
Yeah, the question that I always ask when I'm at schools is, I said, we always say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I go, that's the wrong question. The question should be, what problem do you want to solve? And then how do you get there? And what are the steps to get there? And even when they're writing, there are research papers, and I'll say, I'm writing this tiger book, and it's exactly like the research you have to do. Only the main character is the tiger. And I'm like, what problem is the tiger trying to solve? And then it becomes more dynamic as an exercise for them. And I make the kids tell me, and they're like, food, shelter, and, they're looking for prey, but they don't want to be prey. I said, exactly. And so if I can try to put it the power back into the hands of the young reader and say, you know more than you think you do. So let's get off I want to pass this test, and let's get into now who's out there solving the problem, and what could someone like you do to solve the problem. So one of the things that I put in the book was the Tiger Scouts of Bangladesh. And
love those.
They don't have a huge tiger population, but they have been going out, these kids, and training other kids. And the population is now up by 26%. So I think sometimes if we can get the adults out of the way and tell kids, you can be empowered to do quite a few things, and then we give them just kernels of actionable items and examples of people who, for instance, Fateh Singh Rathore figured out that the reason why villagers were getting rid of the tigers was they were interfering with their livelihood and eating their livestock. So emotional intelligence said, let me give the villagers jobs. Let me convince them to move their farm animals, but let me give the villagers jobs. And I wanted to show you something, which is, if you can see this. This is hard with the background.
There you go. There it
It's
is.
a baseball cap with eyes on. And I had put that in the book because the year before I started working on the Tiger book, we were at Whidbey Island off the coast of Seattle for a retreat, children's writers retreat. And owls were nesting. And one woman was walking through the forest and got attacked by a mama owl. So the biologist came out and said, we're going to make cardboard eyes for you to put on the back of your head so that when you're walking away, it still looks like you're a predator looking at the owl. So the next year when we went, people are really cautious about what, and Whidbey is all. So my husband found these hats on Etsy and got hats for everyone so that we could walk around and still have eyes. And then you find out, when I started working on the Tiger book, that that's what a lot of villagers do because it actually works. And so I wanted to make connections.
I love that. I feel like spoken like a true engineer too. What's the problem? How do I solve it? What steps do I need to take? But I think it's such a powerful way of looking at life. Like what do these animals, what are their problems? And like, how can we help them solve them?
Mm-hmm.
Were there any that you?
I'm sorry, Jill, go ahead.
No, I was just going to toss it over to you and ask.
That was such a great story, Jill. And I have to say, I think now one of my heroes is Christine because of her petition to let girls wear pants in elementary school. I am awed by my elementary school, Christine. That was awesome. There were so many great activists and scientists that popped up in these books, but I think my favorite lately is the one that I've just been researching for the turtle book, which will be out in the future, of these two sisters who lived in Bali, Isabel and Melati Wiesen, who took a look around at a problem that they saw, which was this vast amount of plastic waste and trash that was on the beaches and being washed in from the ocean all the time, and decided to do something about it and started up a petition to ban single-use plastics in Bali and organized a yearly beach cleanup. And these two girls who started in elementary school to do this kind of activism ended up going on a hunger strike to get the attention of the government, meeting with the governor of Bali and getting the law changed to ban plastics and single-use plastics. And I was just blown away by their persistence, among other things, that they didn't just try one thing and stop, but they kept on and on and on and had a real impact on their whole community.
And Jill, I think that's such an important point that Sarah is making, kind of through sharing this story of the sisters in Bali, which is that you're never too young to make a difference, but just because you're young doesn't mean that adults may listen to you as much as I would wish, we would, or be as responsive as I would think that we should be. And so, also that sometimes making a difference requires a lot of persistence. And yet we know that through persistence, so much is possible, including the example that Sarah just shared, also clearly including, I agree, the fantastic story that we all now know about kind of Christine Elementary School, which is that, she had a campaign to enable girls to wear what they want, which also reminds me of one of our favorite children's books in our house, Mary Wears What She Wants, which is about Mary Edwards Walker, who really helped lead the effort, here in the U.S. to allow adult women to be able to kind of wear what we'd want, including pants. So just am so thankful to know more about Christine, but also the stories of how sometimes kind of doing the right thing often requires time, energy, patience, persistence, and yet often like those ingredients make it possible really to do very big things, kind of in the pursuit of what we think is right and good for our planet, for our communities, and for the animals that we all admire so much and hold so dear.
And I feel like we need a save the cross, she persisted kind of thing here, right? This is what the message of another wonderful series that Chelsea has championed is too, that there are challenges, but that doesn't mean that you give up. That if you feel passionately, you can pursue your goals,
I think
even if there are obstacles in the way.
I think that's a really important message. I had a really terse conversation with MIT about the way in which they were looking at students. And I said, we see them. And sometimes, we throw curveballs, but what we're looking for are the kids who know how to fail and pick themselves up and start over, because not everything is a yes and not everything is an A. And sometimes C students are the best students, but I love your idea about the crossover. She persisted, or kids persisted, because NASA's philosophy, for instance, is failure is not an option, it's mandatory, because that's the failure sometimes is where the learning is. And so I tell people, you may not always get what you want. You may not always get the result. What matters is that you tried. And if there's a failure, then my mom would say, oh, okay, you didn't get through the front door. Is there a side door, or is there a back door, or is there a different way to do this? Because, I was growing up in an era where women had few rights, and you had to have your husband sign off on everything. And something as simple as pants. And we won that fight with the school district. But with the animals, it may be that the people with power to set laws will respond to a kid campaign in a different way than they might respond to an adult campaign. There's something really pure about what kids can do. So that's what I want to do, is empower kids to say, you have more power than you think.
Yeah. And you have power to affect people in power. Yeah, it's really remarkable when you sit and think about it, how much one person can affect change in the world, in their world, but in the world, the larger world as well.
Can you tell us what other books are coming out? You mentioned the turtles. There are two more, right, that are coming out in September? Or is there one more?
I think there is one more coming out in September.
Well, I think we have koalas coming out. And turtles, I guess. And rhinoceroses are not out yet. I don't think. Are they? Or are they out? I don't think rhinos are out yet. So we have more coming.
Yeah.
More coming.
Does it look like you were publishing them 3 at a time, or 3 and 3 and then 3 and 3? So the next 3 are going to be rhinoceros, turtles, and koalas, right?
Yeah, we've slowed down a little bit. So there were 3 to sort of launch it, and now we've sort of slowed, I think, to 2 and then 1.
Yeah.
Okay. So
have you done any challenges with libraries, like challenging them, get some of the kids in the Saturday programs to come up with ideas using some of the thoughts from the books? Maybe we should do that.
We should do that. That's a great idea.
We should do that.
All right, we'll put something together and send it out to the Broad Art Library customers. We'll send it out throughout the country and say, this is the challenge for not so much Earth Day, but for endangered species. We can get Riverside to be one of the first ones to input or give us some ideas for it, not to put any pressure on the winner or anything.
Can I make a suggestion? There are still a lot of kids. I have an announcement coming up, but I can't say what it is because I can't get in front of the organization. But about 3 weeks, it'll give me some opportunities to do some things and a budget. one of the things I'm finding, I told the group I want to focus on urban and rural kids where reading is still a struggle and they don't have the same resources as suburban kids. So I've also been really pushing audios, and the audios of this series are brilliant. So for those kids who might look at the book and say, you know, it's word intensive, have them listen to the audio, because we pack the books with all kinds of weird, quirky, kid-friendly facts, like, you know, the difference between a Pizzly bear and a growler bear, or the fact that, you know, an animal eating X is the equivalent of like this many cheeseburgers or this many seats in a Coliseum. Because for those kids who might not quite be ready for the challenge, even though the books are really aimed at young kids, hearing it will still get some of these facts across internally. So I would strongly recommend that, or getting libraries to do story hour and reading a fun chapter.
Yeah, I think the audios are great.
It's a great idea.
So I was thinking maybe we could sign off with one last question, since it is Earth Month, almost Earth Day, not quite yet, right? What is there in all of your lives a particular moment or a particular animal or a particular experience you had that made you really appreciate the earth that we live on?
Oh, so many, Jill. I mean, I spent a lot of time outside as a little kid, and loved always learning about, you know, the local kind of critters, as my grandma Ginger would have called them, the local critters in Arkansas, and those that kind of were quite common, and those that were relatively more rare, and those that we should be worried about. I, though, as you know, Jill, have just always felt such a deep connection to elephants. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to learn everything I could about elephants. I'm very excited to start watching the new series on National Geographic with my kids this weekend about elephants, and just have felt this responsibility and this compulsion to do whatever I could to help protect all endangered species, and knowing how important we each really are to one another and to our kind of sustainability on this planet that we share, and yet have always felt a particular responsibility to do whatever I could to try to help save elephants, to save African and Asian elephants for hopefully the very long horizon ahead.
And you got to meet some, right? You got to visit an elephant.
I have. I've been to a few different elephant sanctuaries and have met some amazing conservationists who are working very hard to help protect elephants and to help protect their habitats for the elephants today and in the future.
So, Christine or Sarah?
There are just so many different times and ways and places that it's sort of hard to pick one animal or one moment. When I was a kid, we always went camping, and I asked my parents as an adult, wait a minute, did we go camping because you love nature or because we didn't have a lot of money to go on vacations? And they were like, both. But when I think back, I think that I've always felt the most connection to the natural world when I'm swimming, because when you're in the water, and particularly in the ocean or a lake, and you have to do what the water wants to do. You have to exist in that element and respect it and go with it. You know, if a current wants to take you somewhere, you're going to go where that current wants to take you. But you can learn to exist with it and exist in it, and it's such a wonderful feeling when you do. So that experience kind of comes back to me when you ask that about what makes you feel connected to the natural world.
I could totally see that. I remember swimming in the ocean with an undertow and just thinking, there's nothing I can do other than
to go with the current.
go with the current.
Right, yeah.
Well, I was talking to Anita Sanchez, who is the third author in the series, and we both have the same perspective, which is go outside. You know, you don't have to travel very far, but go outside. And pandemic really forced the issue when things were shutting down, because I live on a park in the middle of Kansas City, and most people don't think of a city as a place where there's wildlife, but that's when you start to realize the bunnies and where they're living, and the raccoon. And I was not a big raccoon fan because one ate a hole in my roof years ago. But
No.
when you're home, and I had a bird feeder up, and then robins are coming and nesting in the remains of my ferns. And then my cats would go out, and you would see the hierarchy of the squirrels in the trees warning each other that the cats are out. And then the birds would come to the bird feeder, and there was a hierarchy of which ones were on the wall waiting their turn to go to the bird feeder. And what I realized is, we're in a car and we're rushing someplace, or we're on a bike and we're rushing someplace. And sometimes sitting down and slowing down to kind of observe just the nature around our homes gave me such a deeper connection. The books really helped, but I realized I'm rushing and I got a book deadline and I've got to research. And then I just sat outside to get the fresh air. And I thought, there's a whole lot going on here, and the politics of what is going on. And then at one point, I have two cats, one 15 and one that is 1 year old, and watching the older cat train the younger cat on, this is how you go after that squirrel to keep them off the porch. And then the security cameras, I put water out in the summer in case the cats were sleeping outside. And the camera went off and dinged me. And of course, it was dark. I didn't have the porch light on. And I see a mom raccoon and 3 little babies, well, walking. It's very surrealistic to look. I was like, what is that? I went to the neighbor, what is this? And they were like, oh, it's infrared. So those are raccoons. And she is showing them how to go to the cat fountain and wash things. So I think that's my message is, we're not the only occupants of the planet. Slow down and see what it is you didn't see the day before.
I love that. So I guess that's the series message, right? Slow down, go outside, appreciate the animals, and then do what you can to help.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your listening to our authors. We've learned a lot about our environment, about endangered species, and also what we can do to help these endangered species and help each other in learning more about what we can do to help our environment. We appreciate all of our authors that spoke today, and thank you from Penguin Young Readers and Broad Art. We thank all of you for participating.